In this video, I wanted to lay down some groundwork for future videos in which I'll build entire apps. Today, I wanted to cover the use of an app environment. This is a class that basically allows you to, via dependency injection, define different versions of the external resource providers that your app might use. For example, doing file I/O, network I/O, and a host of other things. For today's video, I'll show a simple file client that does reading and writing of files, but through the idea of an app environment. If you're interested in learning a little more about that, I've learned a lot about it through both this great video, How to Control the World by Stephen Celis, and as well as the videos on Point Free, in which Stephen's a part of, and they have a great set of videos on both this concept and many, many other concepts. So let's get started by first creating a very simple file client, which will then facilitate the need and use of an app environment. So I'll create a new file, and we'll just call it FileClient. Okay, so basically we'll make this file client fairly straightforward, as long as I spell it right. And the idea behind these dependency injection structures are that you essentially provide pointers to functions, basically. So in our case, we want to be able to get the documents directory, but we don't want to hard code this. We want to provide that implementation after the fact. So in this case, well, we don't have to pass anything in, but we'd like to return the URL of the documents directory. And you'll see later, what's very nice about that is you can substitute what is returned by this function. And a great example of that might be in previews. You don't want to necessarily use the preview or the simulator's documents directory, which might be hidden in a faraway temporary directory. You may want to expose that somewhere that you can get to, and we'll do that here. Okay. The other thing is obviously the ability to load a file. So we'll say to load a file, you have to pass in a URL, and we'll return the data. And in our case, we want to use combine. And so we don't have to be specific to what sort of publisher. We'll type erase that to any publisher, returning the data or an error if for some reason that doesn't work. And then finally, we'll offer the ability to save a file. And in that case, we need the URL of where to save, and then of course the data itself to save. In this case, the return, there's no data. Saving local files doesn't return anything, only returns an error. So in this case, so there's never any data, but there is potentially an error. And that's really it for setting this very simple client up. Now it's a matter of having an implementation. So before we get to implementation, now we have enough to set up a basic application environment. So let's start with that. I'll create a new file, and I'll just call this app environment. And just in case, I don't think we necessarily need it here, but we'll do that. And for this app environment, we're going to want to place this inside of SwiftUI's environment. In order to do that, it then has to be a class. And the reason it has to be a class is because it has to conform to observable object. And observable objects can only be classes. They can't be value types. They can't be structs. So in this case, we'll just have, for now, a single item is our file client, like that. And because it's a class, and because we'll as you can see here, we need an initializer, we can use the convenience function of command clicking. You can say generate member-wise initializer, and that looks at the properties and generates this for you. We won't make it internal. And I like moving this down. Just remember the key commands. There we go. There we go. So we'll move. Okay. There we go. So it's that simple. We've got a class, and our environment right now will only have a single client. You'll see in future videos that we'll have a whole host of clients here. Now it's a matter of kind of connecting this generic, basically environment at this point to our main app. And in order to do that, what we'll do here is we'll create it. So we'll do a state object, and we'll say var app environment. say create a new app environment with a new file client. And right now we'll just create a blank file client. This isn't how we'll ultimately end up, but for now, that's what we'll do. And then we'll just pass it along as an environment object to our view. So let's see if this compiles. Okay, so what we're seeing here is that we haven't defined FileClient. FileClient is more here of an interface, almost like a protocol that tells us what we need to implement, but we can't new up one of these because we would need to pass all of these in. Now we could do that here, and that's one of the benefits of this approach is we could actually define all of these functions in line. But there's a much nicer, cleaner way of doing that, and we'll do it here right now inside of the file client. All right, so we'll create an extension on file client. And what we'll do here is we'll create the what we'll call the live client. In other words, the client that actually reads and writes files and does so through the documents directory of the running application. So what we'll do is we'll create a static instance of our file client, right? So we'll call that live, and it's of type self. It's one of us, if you will. And what we'll do here is we'll return a new one of a new file client, and we'll define it this way. So we have 3 functions to provide here. So we have to provide the documents directory. So we'll implement that, right? We then have to provide the load file function, right? And that takes a URL in, and then we'll have to provide that. And then finally, we have to implement the save file function, and that takes the URL in and some data, and then we have to save that. So that's the implementation of the live version of the file client. So now we'll quickly do that, and I'll just paste some code in for this one. Basically, we're getting the default file manager, and we're asking it for the documents directory, and then just taking the first value there. For load file and for save file, we have to return publisher. So these are slightly more complicated, but not too bad. Let's start by first grabbing the data, right? So to load a file, we'll say let the data be try, because data might throw an error, the contents of this URL. Okay, well, this is going to, throw an exception. So we have to do try this. We have to catch this. This allows us to try this error throwing, exception throwing call. And if it does throw an exception, then we can catch it and do something about it. But that's still not enough, because this has to return, because this is how we've defined it, we have to return a publisher. So the way to do that is we can just wrap this in a future publisher that provides data or an error. And what futures do is they give us a callback called a promise. Call it whatever you want, but it's effectively a promise that says that when you're finished, you're going to call that promise and say that you've either succeeded or failed. So in this case, we've got our data, so then we'll call the promise, and with a success of our data. But if we haven't succeeded for some reason, we'll go ahead and call our promise, but this time we'll pass in a failure of our error that's passed in, okay? Now we could be done. The thing here is those futures get executed immediately, even before the subscriber connects to this. So what we want to do is we want to defer this loading until someone is actually subscribed. And that's very straightforward. You just say deferred, and that just means that it won't execute that future until someone has subscribed, right? Okay, and almost done, and that's the whole thing. The issue here is, as you can see, the errors, you can't return, you could, but you can't necessarily return a deferred publisher here, because we have type erased that to any publisher. We don't want to know whether it's deferred or not, or a future or not. That's really irrelevant to us. All we want is the data. So in this case, we just say erase to any publisher. And what that does is says, don't worry about the type, just return it as an any publisher, but we know that internally it's actually deferred, running a future, loading our data. Okay. Okay. Now we'll do the same thing for saving. Saving we can implement a little differently, because we want to know when the saving is done. And if we were to use a future, the problem here is there is no data. So if you have a future with a never of data, you can't call it success promise, which is no big deal. If you want to just save the file and not know whether you finished saving, that's fine. We'll just take a different approach here, is we'll write the data and then we'll basically return something in both the cases of success and failure. So much like the loading, we'll start by trying to write our data. Now the difference here is there's nothing returned by write other than a failure itself. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and we'll go ahead and do a do catch on this. And if we fail, that's straightforward, right? We'll return a failure publisher with the error that was given to us. And again, because we're being generic here, saying it's an any publisher coming back, we can't return a failing publisher directly. We just have to say erased any publisher. Okay, so now we returned a generic, essentially generic failure to anyone who tries to save if the write failed. But what do we do if it succeeds? Again, there's no return value. So this one is slightly tricky, right? What do we return here? You can't return nil because in a way that is a type of value, right? And it's expecting a never. So one way to do is you can return an empty object, which essentially is a void. But there's more to it, right? We still can't even do that because, again, a never is the return type here. So we can say ignore the output, and that essentially erases the output. But then we have to also say, well, it is expecting an error if there is an error. And in this case, there is not. So we'll say, well, here's the failure type. If there were a failure, again, in this case, there is no failure. And then finally, we have to say, and also make this generic, erase it to any publisher type. So all of this is really to say we have no value and we have no error. It's a little verbose to do that. Now, we could do it like we did here with a future, and the difference would be we would just never call promise.success. We would just let it do its saving, and that's it. Again, I like this approach in that it allows us to know when a success has happened with no errors, or we'll get the failure. So now what we have here is we have a live file client, right? We have an implementation of this structure. Think of it again as an interface. It's almost like a protocol. This interface to file client says, if you implement these three, if you provide these three functions, I'll now have a full-fledged working file client. And we've done that through a static implementation of that we're calling live. Okay, so all that's to say, how do we use that now? Well, now we can come here and say, well, we have a file client now that's a live file client, right? So now we can say live. And now we know that that is a client that talks to the file system via the documents directory. And what's nice is because AppEnvironment takes file client as a parameter type, we can just say .live, and that makes it really nice and clean and straightforward. At this point, you might say, okay, so what's the value here? Well, there's lots of benefits. There's a whole series of benefits when it comes to testing. We'll cover those in another video. But for now, there's one really nice benefit in that when we're doing previews in SwiftUI, as I mentioned earlier, you don't necessarily want to write to the actual documents directory. You may want to write to somewhere else that's just for previews. So for that, why don't we create a very simple preview-only file client? And then now you can start to see the differences and how you can provide alternate implementations, right? So let's create another one called in file client, and we'll call this one, what do we call it? Preview. So this is a file client that's specific to being used inside of previews. So again, we'll take the very same approach. We'll do that. And for this documents directory, we don't want to return the system document directory. We want to return our own specific path. And I'll show you that in a minute. What is interesting though is, load file works fine here because we pass in the URL. I don't need to re-implement load file that we've already done before. So what's kind of neat here is that you can say, well, just take the live implementation of load file. We'll use that same function. We don't need to re-implement it. And then same for save file. I can say, you know what? I've already got a good implementation in this case, so I'll just use that. What's nice about this is I don't have to implement these for previews. They work just great. I just want to change where the document directory comes from. So in a way, it's a technique for overriding some or all of an implementation that's already there. Okay, for this one, I'll go a little quickly. This is just one approach I've taken to how to get to this preview content. I'll show that in a minute, but I want that to be my documents directory, not the actual documents directory. So what I'll do is I'll start by saying, what's the path to this file right here? And this is a nice little shortcut that's built in the Swift compiler that will give you the full path name to the file you're in right now. So in this case, it would be to my file client. So you just do that, right? And then what I'll do is I'll try to find a path to that preview directory. So what do we just call that? Output directory. And we'll take that my path and we'll say, let's break down the components of that. So that separates all the components of that path with a slash. And then what we'll do is we'll drop the last part because that's the file client itself. I don't need that. I just need to find its directory. And then what we'll add to it is we'll add the preview content file name, which is right there, preview content. We'll add that as at the end of the path. So what we should have is the same location as file client, but we're gonna get rid of the word file client and append to the end the preview content directory name. Okay, so now we'll get the path string, and that'll be that output directory we just did, and now we'll rejoin it by a separator of slashes. So we broke it apart by slashes here, we added preview content, and now we're reassembling it with slashes. And then finally, we'll let the output directory URL be URL here, and we'll give it a file path, and in this case, it will be the path string there, and we'll give it a hint and let it know that yes, this indeed is a directory. Okay, so now we'll return that. So what we've done here is we've grabbed our own path to the file we're in right now. We've stripped off our file name and added the name of the directory that we want to be in, rejoined those parts as a real string path, and then taken that string path, told it that it's a directory and converted to an actual URL, and output that URL. Okay, so that's it. So now we have two versions of file client, and that's really easy to see. If you come back here, we could actually say, well, you know, even during testing and development rather, I don't want to use the live client. I would like to use the preview client. So that you can see is a very, very easy way to switch between those. And again, there's lots more uses of doing this, but for today's video, I'm just going to show you how to use it for previews. So in this case, I'll go ahead and leave it preview. I don't think it matters right now, because what's more important is, of course, in the previews itself. That's how we want to use it. So let's start by creating a very simple view that does something with, with our newfound file client and application environment. So if you recall here in the application itself, we passed in the app environment as an environment object. So how to get that back out? We'll just say environment object, app environment. Of course, you can call this whatever you want, but it has to be of type app environment. So that'll fetch it back out. And what we'll do here is we'll create a super simple text editor that lets us just edit some text, right? And then we'll load and save that text. So let's create that text. So we'll say state var text is a string, and we'll say enter some text. Okay, so now we've got that. We can start the preview. Whoops, we can start the preview now. Let's resume that, give it a second. Okay, there it is. Not very pretty, so let's pretty it up a bit. Let's put this in a VStack. Let's add some padding. And let's, just so we can see it better, let's add some background, color white. Let's do maybe 0.9. There we go. Add some corner radius. Why? Just because we can. Make it even bigger. Okay, so there it is. So now we have a text editor. It's got some text that can be edited. If we hit play here, we should, there we go. Should be able to edit that text. Okay, but notice that every time this preview updates, it's resetting our text because, again, this view, every time things change, it's being recreated, and we have no easy way of kind of populating that with some initial text. So one thing that's interesting is, so for our file client in the preview mode, in the preview version of it, we go looking inside preview content for our documents, not in the documents directory. So one way we can do that, you can utilize that is, pass in an environment object, and we'll pass in a new app environment, but with the file client of preview, the same one we built. What's really neat about that is that now, for example, we can go and create a file here. Let's create a new text file. I don't know if text, no, we'll just call it empty file. There we go, we'll just create an empty file, and we'll call this text.txt. Does not need to be part of the target, doesn't really matter for now. So there it is. So this is my sample text. Okay, so we've put a text file in here. And now, because we're using the preview client, that's its document directory. So in theory, we ought to be able to load that file right in our preview and save to it during development. And then in the live app, right, you could switch this to live, and that would load from the actual documents directory. So let's get that working. And perhaps we can start by saying, how about when this view appears, we'll load whatever is in there. So here we go. On appear, we'll do we'll create a function called load text. So we can just do it this way. Okay. All right, there we go. So we have to use a little bit of combine here, because that's the interface that we've defined, that when we load something, we get a publisher. So let's do that. So now we have access to the app environments file client, and then we'll say load file. And then for recall, let's go back so we can see the content assist. So for load file, the parameters given a URL, it'll give you back a publisher with data or an error. And it wants the URL to our text file. So text file URL. And why don't we create a computed property for this? So no need to keep doing it. So we'll just say var text file URL is the URL. And to get this value, you get the app environment, file client, documents directory. And we have to execute that because it's effectively a closure or a function pointer, however you want to think about it right here. So we execute this with no parameter in to get the URL out. So get the documents directory. Now we can appending the path component of the file we want to load. In this case, text.txt. And that's the file we want. So then now this is our text file URL. So there we go. Okay, now that we've done this, now we have to take the data that's coming out of this publisher and assign it to our view. So to do that, we'll start by first saying, what if there's an error? We have to deal with that. So we'll say, if there's an error, let's just replace the value with a message. Say error loading the file, right? And because the type of the data coming back is an actual data type, so we'll say convert it to data using UTF-8. Okay, like that. All right, if there's no error, we just want to sync the value now. That means we want to take the value that was successfully received, and we want to assign it to our text field. So in that case, we'll just say that the text equals a new string decoding. There we go. We want to decoding our our data that came in, and we want to use UTF-8 as the means of decoding. So that's how you create a new string from a data object that itself contains string data. Okay, that's not quite enough. We've done that. We also need to store this publisher in a collection. So we'll just create one called cancellables. Now, you'd normally want to have all this in a view model, but in this case, for the sake of this example, I'm just doing it all in line. So cancellables here would be a set of any cancellables, and we need to import combine. Okay. And we're going to create a new one of those. There we go. So now we're storing our load file publisher and subscribing to it, getting its data, and storing it in cancellables so it doesn't get garbage collected, basically. Okay, let's see what's wrong here. Our .data. Oh, it could fail, but in our case, we know this can't fail because we're providing the string. So I'm just doing a force unwrap on that. Okay, so yeah, meant to set equals. There you go. Okay, so now if we resume this preview, okay, so a lot happened there. So let's explain. Basically, in our preview provider here, we just pass an environment object of the app environment that our view in this case needs, but we passed the preview one that we talked about a few minutes ago that resets in effect the document directory to be our preview content, not the actual document directory. What's really nice about that is when the app is run on device or in a simulator, you can use the live app environment. But when it's run inside Xcode in a preview, you can say, don't go there, that's too hard to find. Let me define where the documents directory is. And in our case, it's right here in preview content. Okay, and the last step now would be to implement the save. That's really just an exercise in doing something very, very similar to what we did for load. But we'll do it for the sake of completeness. So for example, what if we just added a very basic save button to the top of this VStack? Let me turn this off. Okay. And what if it actually was? Save text, which we haven't defined yet. I'll just put it here. Okay, so it doesn't give us an error. Now we'll just clean this button up. Let's give it a frame. I'll just have it span the whole top, and we'll want the alignment to be trailing at the end and some padding. Let's see, we should have our button up there. Try again. Okay, there we go. There's a save button, and if we click it, it'll do the save. So let's, very similar to how we did load text, let's implement the save. And again, because we're using publishers, we're going to have to use combine to facilitate that save. So AppEnvironment, get access to our FileClient. We're going to save the file. And we have the text file URL already, and now we need the actual data to save. In this case, we'll just take the text that's currently in the view, and we'll say we need to get its data using UTF-8. Okay, so that does the save. Now the question is, do we want to see whether it's successful or not? Why not? Sure. And this is how you do it. So for this one, we'd get a completion. In this completion, we can actually switch on that. And then we'll let, we'll force unwrap this just like before. But for this one, we'll let Xcode fill in the two cases. So we'll just keep it simple now. Here, successfully saved. And in the case of an error, we could print the saving like that so we can see what happens. And there is no received value. You can see never. So in this case, we'll just ignore the receiving since that doesn't happen, basically. Oh yeah. And lastly, just like loading, you need to store the publisher in a cancelable so it stays around. Okay, so that's that. So now if we try again and we hit run, we now should have a functioning loading and saving. And what's a little interesting is you can even, if you pin this view and then open our text file, what's really neat is that even though we're in a preview, we should be able to see changes if you click save. And then you can see that our preview is loading and saving directly into our Xcode text.txt file right here, and we can watch it. And that makes it really nice for, again, if you're developing and you need to essentially mock your, in this case, FileClient or any other sort of external data sources, whether it be network or otherwise, or anything else, database, anything like that, you can provide an implementation into the app environment, which is not necessarily a live one. And as I mentioned before, it also works great for testing because now you can completely control what's happening with those clients. Okay, I know this was a little long. I hope it was helpful. In the next video, we're going to talk about how to further expand upon this and also how to set up your projects to be a lot more modular using Swift Package Manager. Thanks.